Welcome to the number 29 team of this deep dive series for the 2022-2023 NBA teams, bringing on the Houston Rockets. And this team is in year 2 of the post-James Harden rebuilding process. Last year was pretty rough to watch if you're a Houston Rockets fan, but they have a lot of potential, a lot of young talent on this team already that they only got better by hitting on a lot of the picks that we've seen in this year's draft class. At least it looks like that so far into the Summer League and throughout the various games and practices and draft reports and whatever that we've watched. But the thing is, they're rebuilding. So the things that matter for this season isn't winning. It's developing Jalen Green, seeing what you have in Jabari Smith, seeing if Kevin Porter Jr. can be a starting point guard, seeing if Alperen Şengün can be a starter despite his given limitations. How good is Coach Silas given a raw deal that he was given? But they have a pretty decent draft pick situation. They're not a glitch like Oklahoma City, but Brooklyn is a very volatile situation, and they have Milwaukee's pick, and I think they have a Thunder pick somewhere as well. What I'm trying to say is that the Rockets are in a really good spot, and if this was a top 5 teams that are going to look good in 5 years from now, I think the Rockets are definitely up there. They have a bona fide talent in Jalen Green. They got number 3 overall pick Jabari Smith, who I think should have been number 1 overall. They got a ton of young players, Jayshawn Tate, Josh Christopher, Kenyon Martin Jr., a lot of really nice talent on this team, and I think the future is looking bright for Houston. That being said, the present, not so bright. They're going to come in with the 78.35 rating. That puts them at 29th. And again, this is all done factitiously, numerically. It's all math. It's all facts. Do not argue with me about what the results are. This is simply where the Rockets rank. And they're the 29th team in the NBA this upcoming season. Finished last year 20-62. Had a really a couple of long stretches of losing streaks. I think one time they were up to 20 games in a row lost. Pretty ugly season overall. But like I said, they have a lot of talent on this team, a lot of guys that they're going to continue to grow and develop. For the offseason, of course, they brought in Jabari Smith with that number 3 overall pick. A lot of people gave it an A+ just because the number 1 player in the class fell to them at 3. I think that was an incredible pick up. The pick, I mean, they picked 3rd out of the top 3 talent. I mean, that's basically how it works out. But I like some of their other picks. Ty Washington going from 26 to 29, picking up draft capital and picking up a guy who's an undersized Kentucky scoring guard who's been proven as a formula to work at the next level. I think it's going to be a great backup bench player for them. Tari Eason, nice pickup. I didn't love the player, but I really liked the fact that they got him. And he's looked really well in the Summer League. He's played really well. Very impressive defensively. Offense needs to pick up. They picked up the GOAT Boban, Trey Burke, and Marquise Chris in the trade with Christian Wood. And with the loss of Christian Wood, I think that is one of those addition by subtraction. He really didn't look like he wanted to be there in Houston. He was kind of this weird ball hogging, would just jack up shots in the middle of the shot clock while they're trying to run their offense kind of guy. Didn't give him a lot of effort. As an undersized 5, stretch 4, stretch 5 kind of tweener player, he's not big enough to bang and play good defense. He's not great offensively. He's a horrible free throw shooter. Had a lot of issues when he was playing in Houston. It's not that he's going to be a bad player for Dallas. It's just that they're going in a different direction. He didn't fit the timeline. He got paid by Houston. He could have made it to an all-star game. I don't believe he did. Definitely impressed in the fact that he's not just some kind of role player. He is a legit starter in this league. He's just not a starter for the Houston Rockets. And I think it's going to be really good for this team that Christian Wood is no longer here so that they could develop Alperen Şengün and Jabari Smith, figure out what they're going to do at the center position. They also lost Dennis Schroeder. I mean, whatever. And they lost a whole bunch of John Wall trade scenarios that you see all over the internet. What if we trade John Wall for Russell Westbrook and a 2027 second-round pick? How does that sound? Nobody wants to do that. I was so sick of seeing John Wall trade rumors for the entire year. But let's talk about the players who are here, starting at the point guard position with Kevin Porter Jr. And man, is this going to be a really volatile breakdown. Kevin Porter Jr. is a good talent. The question is always going to be his mental stability. I mean, he drove out of the stadium mid-game this past season after fighting with his coaches, and this is after a well-documented history of him being a nutcase, throwing food, having illegal weapons charges and assault charges, and he's only 22 years old. There's a great post that I saw that effectively summarized his entire history in the NBA. The Cavs were well aware and had openly stated that he, out of everyone in their young core, i.e. Colin Sexton and Darius Garland, had by far the most potential and was who they planned to build around. Kevin Porter Jr. had a mixture of explosive athleticism, ball handling ability, great size for the guard wing position, and potential for elite scoring. The Cavs essentially released him despite knowing all of this due to his off-court issues and mental health question marks. He has a well-marked history of poor decision-making, including but not limited to rolling a car late at night in a sketchy area with both weed and a handgun in the car, almost killing himself, assaulting 2 women with his sister, harassing and being belligerent with the arresting officers who came due to said assault, throwing food and insinuating that the Cavs general manager, who is both Jewish and African American, is a slave driver, an incident in college that resulted in Kevin Porter Jr. being suspended, not really sure what it is, etc., etc. This is in addition to seemingly severe depression, anxiety, other anger, and mental issues. And as always, we wish the best for people who are going through a lot of these things. Like I said, he's only 22 years old. He's had a rough upbringing. I think there was something about his father being shot when he was a child. It was just a really unfortunate upbringing for him. But I'm just talking about him, the prospect, him, the player. It's going to be, can you stay on the court? Can you keep your head on you? Can you lead this team? Because that's the job of a point guard. And he's not a natural point guard. He has legit talent and is a combo guard with some ball handling and vision abilities. His play drops off a little bit when he tries to run an offense as he did last season, but it was literally the first time that he played point guard officially in his career. He is clutch when you need it. He can play. He's just got 2 huge question marks that are always going to stick around. Can he keep his head on his shoulders? And what position does he end up playing? Defining a point guard in today's NBA is really tough. And with the requirement of the 3-point shooting, there are no more Jason Kidds. There's no more John Stockton types. You have to be able to shoot the ball well and pass the ball and run the offense and feel the rhythm of the game and set up players and get everybody their touches because the egos are bigger than ever. I categorize point guards into a few classes. There's the floor generals, the Chris Paul types who feel the game, set their teammates up, know when to take over, know when to step back and let Devin Booker cook, make the right play, make the right pass, and don't turn the ball over that often. And those guys are few and far between. There's the slashers, the Russell Westbrook types who will drive hard into the paint, draw 2 defenders, and kick to the open man. And then there's the shooting guard that masquerades as a point guard, guys who aren't great facilitators like D'Angelo Russell, but can score and are either too small to play any other position or not athletic enough to guard the wing. And that's kind of where I put Kevin Porter Jr. as. But the thing about him is that he wants to be a point guard, and that's the most important trait out of anything, better than any statistic, better than any number, is that he has the want to. He wants to play the point guard position. He's going to study. He's going to try his ass off. And that's better than like the Spurs situation where players are being thrust into the point guard position because there's none on the roster. I just think he's so much stronger for your team as a scoring combo guard. Sure, he can set up teammates here and there, but his strength is attack, attack, attack. Likely a peak Kevin Porter Jr. is coming off the bench as a 6th man spark, kind of a Jordan Clarkson type of guy. He's a 3.1 turnover a game, 2-to-1 turnover ratio, which is really pretty ugly for a point guard. He's got poor shot selection, was super inefficient last year, and had a lot of turnovers. Kind of sounds a little Russell Westbrookian. Also, fix your free throws, young fellas. Shooting 64% from the free throw line is abysmal, especially if you shoot 37% from the 3-point line. But at the end of the day, I really like Kevin Porter Jr. He's one of the more fun, explosive players to watch in the game, and he's super young. Like I said, I know he's talented, and the Rockets are rebuilding anyway, so let's see what Kevin Porter Jr. can give you as a point guard as he continues to develop. And if he hits, great, you have your point guard of the future. If he busts, so be it. Now you just know that you need a point guard in your next draft. Moving on to the backup guard ranking, where they're going to come in at the 72 overall with Trey Burke and Daishen Nix. Trey Burke is a fairly mediocre backup point guard. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's definitely an upgradable position. He's the classic vet. He's going to be ready whenever his number is called. Gives you average play when he's on the court. Despite being only 6 feet tall, he gives you good effort on the defensive end, and he mostly saw garbage time out there in Dallas, especially after Spencer Dinwiddie came over. I think Dallas was really tough on him. He didn't get the ball handling duties. He was effectively point guard 4 on their roster, behind Luka Doncic, behind Jalen Brunson, behind Spencer Dinwiddie. And then when he was on the court, he was almost relegated to a catch and shoot type of player because that was the sort of offense that they ran in the Luka Doncic-centric Dallas offense. So likely these minutes are going to go to Daishen Nix eventually to see what they have at that point guard position, unless Daishen Nix continues to suck, which we'll talk about later. But Trey Burke can fit in just fine as a backup point guard. Again, another great spot for a Sharif Cooper to go. See if he can develop some sort of that talent here and maybe bring back Dennis Schroeder, although that's probably not going to happen. Moving on to the point guard 3 ranking with Daishen Nix. And man, he is their other problem point guard for an entirely different set of reasons. He was a former 5-star prospect, ranked 21st in the ESPN high school rankings in 2020. Went to the G League Ignite and decided that he liked eating more than playing basketball. He lost a ton of his quickness. He never developed his shot, had a horrible season where he went undrafted last year, complete bust in the G League Ignite, and then he was far from impressive last season when he saw NBA minutes. He looks okay in the G League, but I mean, everybody looks good in the G League. That's why you can't take Summer League and you can't take G League stats all that serious. I certainly saw an improved player from last year's Summer League, Daishin Nix, but he's still a problem guy. He needs to learn how to shoot, period. 27% from the three-point line and 53% from the free throw line simply does not cut it. That means he has to go into the gym and work his ass off. He's got good size, but like I said, he has his eating issues. He just can't seem to slim down. A little of the James Harden-ish problem where you get too fat and then you never can work the fat off. He's a solid passer, probably has the best vision and is the best pure passer on the roster currently. So he definitely has a spot somewhere if he just puts in the work. And that's always been the question mark for Daishin Nix. Do you want to put in the work or do you want to go back and eat more McDonald's? So that's going to bring their point guard ranking as a 75 overall, 27th in the league. Not that there isn't talent there, but there definitely could be an improvement. We'll see how Kevin Porter Jr. continues to develop, has his second full season as a true point guard. But let's move on to the position that is going to be really electric for this team. Shooting guard with Jalen Green, where he's going to come in as a 19th overall ranked player at a 79 overall at the two guard. And man, last year was really weird. I wouldn't say he struggled. I wouldn't say he underperformed. I wouldn't say he was bad. I'll say Jalen Green was quietly pretty good. He really struggled at the beginning of the season, which unfairly knocked him completely out of any of the Rookie of the Year considerations. And it was crazy because he had an incredible second half of the season. He clearly has the physical gifts. See every single drive where he barrels headfirst into a rim protector and tries to dunk on them. Clearly he has the stroke. He shot very solid from the three-point line, 34% for a rookie. That's doable. He has a great free throw percentage. And we all knew Jalen Green coming out of the box would struggle more than Cade Cunningham would. He's such a raw talent, but it's all about high end. How good are you going to be 10 years down the road potential? He's so athletic. He's like John Morant when he jumps. He'll try to drive and dunk on anyone and everyone, and he's still improving that jumper. I'm super high on the Jalen Green stock. I think he's going to be just a tick underneath the all-star caliber player, but he's going to be the number one option on this team, barring any unforeseen circumstances. He's going to put up numbers, probably 20 to 22 points a game. Will it translate to wins? Probably not, because there's not a lot of other talent on this team. But I think he's going to have a huge sophomore campaign. If you look at anything like how the second half of the season was for him, Jalen Green is the real deal. All those people are saying, oh, Jalen Green's a bust. Oh, the Rockets should have drafted Scotty Barnes. I think they aren't looking deep enough into the numbers. I don't think they watched the full season. At least a lot of people didn't watch the Rockets the second half of the season, and I can't blame them. But Jalen Green is legit. Moving on to this small forward position, and I didn't really know who to put here. I see a lot of lineup projections as having Eric Gordon here instead of Jayshawn Tate or Tari Eason. I've personally been waiting for Eric Gordon to get traded for like 6 years now, but hey, if he starts at the 3, I'll disagree with it fundamentally, but for now we're just going to roll with it as it is for the deep dive roster, where he's going to come in as a 74 overall, ranking 29th at the small forward rankings. Now, there's no questions regarding his talent. Only the level of regression you'll see because he is 34 years old at this point. And if he gets traded away to a contender where he comes in and gives them value off the bench. I've been calling for him to be traded since James Harden left, but he's been the ultimate professional when he's been here, despite being part of every single trade rumor, earning $20 million a year, coming in, putting in the work, shooting 41% from the three-point line, and he still has another year left on his contract, which is actually not guaranteed whatsoever, and basically makes it a club option. It's just food for thought for teams that are actually trading for him. But for the traits of Eric Gordon, he's a tick undersized at 6'3", 6'4", scoring guard. He can shoot from deep, and he's actually a pretty good defender given his thick build compared to what common perception is for his porous defense. He gives you a little bit of everything. He can handle, he can shoot, he can drive, he can defend to some extent. He'll lead the bench unit. He can start for you at the 2 or at the 3 as we see here. He's just a very versatile player that today's NBA loves. Again, he's a little bit older, so he's not going to provide as much as he would, say, 5 years ago. Eric Gordon would, but he still has value to a championship team. And there were some reports that the Bucks, the Suns, and the Heat tried to trade for him. And I think it would be considered invaluable to any of their playoff runs. Maybe the Rockets are playing a little too much hardball, trying to get too much draft capital, which in this case, I hope it doesn't blow up in their face, but he can certainly provide for a team around the trade deadline as long as the team isn't too undersized. He is only about 6'3", 6'4". So if you're a team like the Nuggets, who have too many undersized guards on their team already, I wouldn't trade for him. But any other team, he can provide shooting, spacing, basically do exactly what you need from the perimeter to do. Also, he absolutely crossed up GOAT James in an embarrassing fashion last year, and that alone is worth the price of admission. but he doesn't have a very high ranking, going to come in at 74. That's kind of that replaceable starter level, especially at this point in his career. Eric Gordon, he can look to move from, and I think the Rockets really should, because this would be taking minutes away from other guys that I'd like to see them develop. As for the power forward position, they're going to come in at 26 to 75 overall for Jabari Smith, and Jabari. I had Jabari as the number one prospect of the draft, as did many others. I have him as the highest upside offensive player in the class. Today's NBA, offense matters more than defense, and I had my player comp of Jabari Smith to something of a Kevin Durant archetype. The fact that he fell to 3 will hopefully come to be a curse for the Thunder or the Magic if you're a fan of the Los Rockets. He is a great athlete, which gives him one up on Paulo. He's a great offensive player, gives him one up on Chet, and he's got a classic 6'10", 220 NBA build that you don't have to worry about going in for 82 games this season. That gives you 2 up on Chet Holmgren. Now, is he the facilitator that Paulo was? No. Did he look as impressive in Summer League as Paulo did? No. But Jabari Smith is a bucket. Now, I do think people are a little bit overrating his defensive abilities. I read on some of those horrible message boards that I frequent that he's a quote-unquote defensive anchor, a quote-unquote elite rim protector, also a big wing stopper, and a defensive player of the year candidate. Calm down. I don't see that. It's not that he couldn't do that. He has the physical gifts to do it, but his priority is offense, and what I see is a bucket getter. He shoots ridiculously well for a guy that has 0 fundamentals. Imagine what happens once he gets to the NBA. He learns to have a solid base on his jumper. He actually shoots and practices instead of having to go to trigonometry at Auburn. And the fact that he shot 42% from 3, given his form right now, I can't even imagine how good he's going to shoot once he gets the fundamentals down. His handle also needs a lot of work. It's never going to be that good because he is a 6'10" forward, but his finishing is certainly a concern. But you look at the ages. He's the 8th youngest player in the NBA right now. He's a year younger than Chet Holmgren, 3 years younger than Keegan Murray. This dude is going to be elite in 10 years or so, and that's the way the rebuilds work. The offensive potential of Jabari and Jalen Green is going to be ridiculous. And honestly, a lot of the onus will fall on Kevin Porter Jr. to set them up and stay out of the way, because this team has the potential to be dynamic offensively given a few years of development. But that's the name of the game. You got to be patient with the players that you have. I think the talent is here. I think the skeleton, I think the framework for a bright future in Houston is here, with Jalen Green and Jabari Smith leading the way. His size also along Alperen Şengün is going to be incredibly helpful, because Alpi is a mess on the defensive end. And for those of you worrying about his Summer League performances, I think you got to take the Summer League with a grain of salt. It was a bunch of players who didn't set each other up. They were all just ball hogging, all chucking up shots, fighting for their roster spots, fighting to put up points. I wouldn't take anything that happened. I know he didn't look all that confident, but I would just say, you know what, Summer League, whatever, wash my hands of it and let's continue on. Now, do I ever think Jabari Smith is going to be a 1? I'm not really sure. I think the draft class this season was a bunch of B+ to B guys, no generational talents, but I definitely think Jabari Smith has the capacity to be a really solid contributor on the Houston Rockets. Moving on to the center position, where they're going to come in at 24th overall with Alperen Şengün leading the way with the 76th overall. And I know Alperen is the fan favorite, and don't you dare objectively critique anybody that the NBA internet fanboys love. I learned that the hard way with Alex Caruso. But Alperen Şengün had a pretty okay year overall. The issues of his draft report carried over. Can't shoot from distance. 24.8% is horrible from the three-point line. His foot speed is horrible on defense. He can't really rim protect, and he's undersized at 6'8". Now, that said, he's a special playmaker for a center. He could run the Nikola Jokic Memorial point center position. He had some turnover issues, sure. A poor handle, well, he's a center. But his poor shooting was really awful. Now, I think a lot of these deficiencies in part was due to the pace of the NBA being faster than what he was used to in Turkey. And it was in one of his interviews, he said, you know what, this game was a lot quicker than I expected. It took him a while to get his feet under himself. And that's understandable. He's a rookie. He's super young himself. Now, there was some stat that said outside of 5 feet, he shot 40% from all sides of the court. It's really worrisome. He has his foul issues. He has his defensive issues. He has his shooting issues. I just hope that he gets serviceable enough on the defensive end to stay on the court. Hopefully, Jabari Smith can be a great help defender as well. Meanwhile, I'd like to see the Rockets get a really athletic rim runner to back him up. One of those JaVale McGee, Mitchell Robinson types, just so they could have a really stout defense when Alperen Şengün goes on the bench. That being said, he's a definite contributor to this offense. And of course, he's a fan favorite. Speaking of fan favorites at the center 2 position is Boban. Now, having Boban as your center 2 isn't ideal. We all know Boban the meme, and we love him almost as much as Alperen Şengün. And Boban is the ultimate professional. He's great to have you on your team as a background leader. You just don't really want him on your team doing much more than soaking up those garbage time minutes. So being center 2 right now isn't ideal. His offense is I'm taller than you, and his defense is you're quicker than me. And he is really slow at this point in his career, about 33 years old. Honestly, seeing some of the game tape, he should probably retire soon and be better served being a coach. But Boban still can give you a little offense and definitely get the crowd involved when your team is down. So it won't be the worst thing having him on the roster. You just need a really athletic backup center. And that might be where Marquise Chris comes in. Theoretically, you could have Usman Garuba here, but I think his compact size and lesser athleticism fits him in as more of a wing player PJ Tucker type. As for Marquise Chris, despite being effectively a bust, a former number 8 overall pick, Marquise gives real good energy to this team and good effort off of the bench. He's an undersized 5, but has really good athleticism, really good strength. He can rim protect to some extent and be a lob threat. Basically, if he puts in the work, he can be the backup 5 that you're looking for on this Houston Rockets team, or he can get cut and nobody's going to blink an eye. He had a strong year in 2019 with the Warriors when they were horrible and had the number 2 overall pick, but that is a few years ago, and he really hasn't shown much since. He also has issues fighting with other teams and other players, and that definitely does not help him stay on the roster for long. But that is going to be your backup center position. Not really great at this point. Like I said, they're a young, talented team looking to develop players, so maybe going out and getting a DeAndre Ayton wasn't the right move for the Houston Rockets, but they certainly could look to improve on the depth. Moving on to their bench, where they're going to come in at a 24th overall in the league, 72 overall. I like the talent on this team. Like I said, the Houston Rockets have a lot of good young players, just need a couple seasons to see what they really are. Somebody who used to be a young player was Jae'Sean Tate, a great hustle, great energy, and great defensive player. He's just an undersized 4 who can't shoot. He's listed at 6'4", playing against other power forwards who have like half a foot of height on him. It's an issue, but he's a good guy. He's a great teammate. He's a hard worker by all accounts, and he figured out ways to stay ahead of basically the same player, but younger, in Kenyon Martin Jr., who I think is more talented. That speaks to his effort, his energy, and his abilities to impress the coaching staff that much. He's one of those guys that can help any team, but you don't want too many of on your team. Maybe 1 or 2 at the bench, like a Gary Payton Jr. or a Jared Vanderbilt. If your whole team is filled with Jae'Sean Tate, it's going to be an issue, but having 1 on your team is great. He's probably not for long in this team as well. If the roster is looking to get a little younger, looking to get a little longer, he's already turning 27 this upcoming season. I know it's only his 3rd season, but he came into the league at 25 years old, and I think he really could be a potential trade candidate with Eric Gordon. But that said, as long as he's on the team, he's got great effort, is great energy for the team, a good defender. He's just undersized and can't shoot the ball, and those are probably the 2 biggest things in the NBA these days. Moving on to his co-partner, Kenyon Martin Jr., and I have no issues with Kenyon Martin Jr. going out and seeking a trade. He's 5 years younger than Jae'Sean Tate, has a similar skill set, is 2 inches taller, he's a better shooter. Across the board, it feels like Kenyon Martin Jr. should have gotten more minutes, but because of his limitations offensively and his lesser defensive tenacity, and because Jae'Sean Tate just gave so much more effort and energy, KJ Martin has always been on the outside looking in. The fact that Danuel House got any minutes ahead of KJ is a fucking travesty and a huge red flag. Now, this might be an issue with the coaching. Is Stephen Silas's job to develop talent or to win basketball games? But for now, Kenyon Martin Jr. is a highlight reel off the bench. He's a freak athlete who just needs to continue to develop his shot. And if he can get anything that resembles a handle, he can be a wing player. Otherwise, he's going to be stuck at this undersized tweener 4-5 spot that he's just too small to play, and his defense isn't strong enough, and he's not built enough. He shouldn't start anywhere if he does get traded away, but he's a good young prospect with great athletics that deserves some run somewhere in the NBA. With the drafting of Jabari Smith and Tari Eason, it's only going to further confuse where Kenyon Martin Jr.'s role is going to fit on the Rockets, likely another trade candidate. Another of where does this player go? Usman Garuba from last year's draft, I believe the 23rd overall pick. Usman Garuba I was never high on because of his complete inability on offense. Defensively, he's good. He's very good. He could already be a plus player, probably a close to defensive player of the year candidate from the perimeter on that side of the court. He had some injuries to deal with last season, was a bit of an issue there, and he shot 25% from 3. That's just unacceptable from a wing player. He's a horrible offensive player, can't dribble the ball well, can't pass the ball well, can't shoot the ball well. And if you're starting to notice, there's a lot of competition at the floor for the Rockets. Obviously, Jabari Smith is going to start, which leaves Tari Eason, Jayshawn Tate, Kenyon Martin Jr., Usman Garuba. Hell, if you want to throw in Marquise Chris because he's only 6'9" himself, there's a lot of question marks at this position and a lot of competition. Who's going to fall where is going to be really interesting to see with this team. Going on to somebody who does have a spot on this roster, Garrison Matthews, definitely a feel-good story. One of those goofy white guys that bounced around the league. I know he was on Washington. I think he had a couple tryouts with the Bulls and then ended up in Houston and he played okay. Now, he's not actually a great three-point shooter. If you look at the numbers, statistically, he's 36% from the three line, but he shoots ridiculously poor quality JJ Redick, falling backwards, just coming off a screen, kicking out his legs, three-point shots instead of those, quality PJ Tucker sit in the corner and be wide open from three shots. But he plays hard. He takes charges, he lays out his body for the team, and he earned his money with the Rockets. He's just a bad defender. No matter how hard he tries, he cannot move his feet. He's under strength, undersized. He sprints off screens and takes the ugliest, deepest threes ever, and he gets fouled for half of them. He's the king of kicking out, but he's definitely found a spot in this league, got guaranteed money finally from the Houston Rockets, and he's going to be on the roster as a three-point specialist, nothing more, but really affordable at $1.8 million. So a decent signing when you're seeing guys like Doug McDermott and Duncan Robinson getting $20 million. As for the next player, Tari Eason, going to be a fan favorite. And I won't lie, I was lower on Tari Eason than most scouts were. He didn't look all that athletic when I watched his LSU games. His three-point shot is questionable. He shot 36% on really low volume his sophomore year. Across his 2 seasons in college, he went 35 of 107, but he's got great size for the power forward position. He's going to be a good defender, had a really strong summer league showing. I just didn't see the same effort that he put out in the summer league that I did at LSU, which is kind of weird to me. But he's a good defender who has higher upside than Usman Garuba, has higher upside than Jayshawn Tate, probably has higher upside than Kenyon Martin Jr. as well. So he could certainly find a way to be in the backup power forward, if not sliding in to play the 3 alongside Jabari Smith later on in the season. Definitely going to be an interesting year for Tari Eason. Moving on to David Nwaba. He's a fine bench mafia player. He never developed his jumper. Good energy, can defend the perimeter at a competent level, and Coach Silas plays vets way too much, so he's probably going to see some minutes this season. But at the end of the day, he belongs at the end of the bench and will be the hardest playing guy on the floor when he gets his minutes in garbage time. I don't really know what he brings to this team that's rebuilding. He's 29 years old, costs $5 million a year. He does have a team option that's upcoming. He just can't shoot, can't play make, and is an average or slight plus defender who's hitting his physical prime. So I think he's one of those guys that you look to trade away, you look to move on from at the end of the season. Other than that, maybe he can be a role model for the players as the ultimate professional for this Houston squad. Moving on to another young player in Josh Christopher, and I hate making comparisons about players, but I really think Josh Christopher or J Gup really feels like a young J.R. Smith. He ball hogs, he takes awful quality shots, and he makes incredible highlights. He gets tunnel vision with the ball in his hands and is a bit of a ball-dominant scoring guard on a team with Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., formerly Christian Wood, and now Jabari Smith. That's not really a formula for success, but he's a really nice shooter, was really electric for them off the bench as a scorer, put up some ridiculous stats as well, and I think he definitely has value to this team as a backup scoring guard, similar to what Kevin Porter Jr. was at an earlier point in his career. The Josh Christopher points of improvement this season is playmaking and efficiency because the talent is certainly there. He can get you a bucket and is just further contributing to this offensive versatile team that in 2-3 years is going to be electric. Moving on to Ty Washington, another offensive versatile player. Hopefully he's going to be the ultimate I told you so of the draft class. How the Rockets not only draft Ty Washington, but pick him up and get more draft capital moving back in the same draft class is a wonder. I was super high on the Ty Washington stock. I raked him at 17th overall. Undersized Kentucky scoring guards put in work at the next level. Look no further than Tyler Hero, Emmanuel Quickley, and Tyrese Maxey. These guys get it done. They put ball in bucket. They are undersized, so it's always going to be defensive issues, defensive liabilities, and a lot of the players on this team are a tick undersized. Kevin Porter Jr. was only 6'4". Jalen Green is about 6'4", I want to say. Jayshawn Tate, 6'4". Kenyon Martin Jr. is 6'6", maybe 6'5". Christian Wood was undersized, 6'9", 6'10" for their center position. Alperen Şengün, 6'8". So having a smaller guard on your team isn't exactly ideal for this team that certainly needs size as well. But he's a bucket getter. And people are going to look at his stats and just say, oh, he didn't have a good year at Kentucky. He had a really brutal ankle injury that impacted his explosiveness. His pre and post-injury film and stat lines are pretty obvious in showing that he was a very limited player in the second half of the season. I think he's going to be one of the breakout rookies, kind of like Bones Highland was last year for the undersized scorers, that people are going to say, how did we miss on this guy? He's not a great athlete, but he was a really smart, really good pick and roll player, has solid control over the game. And right now he's a combo guard, but with Dyson Nick still being fat, he might find his role on this team as backup point guard. Maybe something similar to what Monty Morris offered the Nuggets for years, just food for thought. Moving on to Sterling Brown, he's still in the league. That's all I have to say about him. And Trevor Hudgens on their two-way contract. He was the NABC Division II Player of the Year for the Northwest Missouri State University Bearcats. Gotta be honest, I didn't watch a single Northwestern Missouri State Bearcat game. By all reports, he's a 6-foot point guard, solid shooter, mediocre playmaker, and lacks athleticism. He had a really impressive postseason in the Division II with like a 15-0 record, got demolished by COVID, and he found his way onto the G League team or the two-way team, whatever, for the Houston Rockets. I don't expect much from him, mostly because of his size. Anybody who's 6 feet tall has to be like the greatest athlete ever. Otherwise, they just don't find their way into the NBA. Lastly is Bruno Fernando. They're bringing him in on an exhibition contract, just trying to see if he can provide the size that they're looking for at the center position. Boban isn't really the answer, and Marquise Chris isn't big enough himself. And I don't know about Bruno. He's been on 3 teams in 3 years and has failed to impress anybody. He has the physical profile to be a very rock-solid, big 6'10" backup center. He just has horrible basketball IQ, which makes him a poor defender. He's already a 0 offensively and just hasn't really improved since he came to the league. So all in all, he doesn't probably bring much to the team if he even sticks around past those 10 days. Moving on to the coach and culture ranking, where they're going to come in at 21st, giving them a 69 overall. And I do like this front office. I like some of the moves that Rafael Stone has been making so far regarding the trade packages. I don't like the roster construction, not really having a solid point guard, and the roster breaks down to a lot of combo guards, Kim Porter Jr., Jalen Green, Eric Gordon, Josh Christopher, Ty Washington, and a lot of power forwards, Jabari Smith, Jason Tate, Kenny Martin Jr., Usman Garuba, Tariq, and Marquise Chris. I like having more variety in the skill sets, having a couple point guard facilitators, having a couple scorers out the bench, having a couple 3-and-D, nice wing prospects, having a couple rim runners, having a couple stretch fives. But this team is rebuilding. They're trying to see what they have and get the best players available at the positions and at the free agents pickups that they have. So I don't hate what Rafael Stone is doing for now. It's just not coming in very highly. As for their head coach, Steven Silas, he does have an issue of playing vets for the rebuilding team instead of playing the young guys who are going to make mistakes and cause issues. But he's not as bad as James Borrego, who benched James Bouknight for an entire season. And he really got given the short stick, signing, then immediately having James Harden fat his way out of the team. And they go from being competing for a championship, aging roster, to rebuilding super young, really, really bad 20-win team. So the thing about grading Steven Silas is it's really hard to run an offense when everybody on the team is still wearing diapers. Kevin Porter Jr. is playing point guard for the first time in his career. Everybody else is under 21 years old. So I think it's going to be tough to really grade what Steven Silas is as a head coach. I like him. He's got a smiley personality, seems to have a decent amount of trust in all the guys. And this is probably going to be a decision year for Coach Silas. He's had the rug pulled out from under him year 1, had a really awful team in year 2. Now they have some sort of a vision. They have an understanding. They have the future of Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, and maybe whoever they pick up in this upcoming draft class as their future. Let's see what he does given all of these tools and all of these young talents, which is where they're going to come in with that 78.35 rating. Not a very talented team right now, but of course you don't take potential into account when you're grading these teams. Projected to win 26.5 games. Not exactly ideal, with plus 50,000 championship odds, which is like 1 in 100,000 or something. I did the math before. I don't remember how Vegas comes up with those odds. But again, not going to be a very fun season for Rockets fans, but it's going to be a fun team to watch, and that's the priority. The ideal season results are Jalen Green and Jabari Smith break out. They show they have 2 bona fide stars on their team, and they still finish in last place and win the lottery. Looking forward to about 2 years from now is when I could see legitimate title contention, or at least playoff contention, for Houston Rockets teams. So look to 2024 with this squad. But that is going to be the 29th ranked team in this deep dive series. Like I said, if this was 5 years from now, or if this was how good is the team going to be in 5 years projections, the Rockets are really looking good. They're in a really nice spot. The front office has a clear vision of what they're trying to do. And I think they have a very respectable franchise. But as for this upcoming season, they're going to fall in at 29th. Let me know what your thoughts are, what you agree with, what you disagree with, and I'll catch you in the next one.